va faire les récitations. Zanje Jodan Zaje Janam Janjo Barado Dani Jabzo Jendaje Jenzo Jebe Zanan Dola Benjir Zanje Jo Barajo Zanje Jodan Zaje Janam La Janjo Barado Dan Soje Daje Jenzo Jebe Zanam Jendola Benjir Zanje Jo Barajo Zanje Jodan Zaje Janam Janjo Barado Dani Jabzo Je Daje Jenzo Jebe Zanam Dola Benjir Zanje Jo Barajo Zemjan Damje Dewa Dan Deve Jodan Pai Joje Dong Dong Je Judan Revara Joje Dong Mebe Deva Damba Mindre Wa Joje Nyerin Jadan Dan Reve Don Chambola Neba Jura Je Badan Zave Lama Rimba Je Nage Je Mora Bemeden Kadri De gozon de ngandro zarado zoi chamden de jambeya jaze lo ganje lo de ne de ninda namda la zeve jenye dongun zijin zijir ne je dogale bamze kanda zibe zara mare mandu dongara jezeve Rozo gana buje daze yana dojo yandenzo Roda chadro nyama nilon lege chadro dezeji Mare menze donga nyugo jenye joze redino Ne dachin sachu darase yanden luso jerze dovu Chudra Chudan Juni Jendre Dal Munze Chambe Yang La Du Tseden Jeje Jera Bezergi Dal Jimu Mumbarab Sene Kadan Den Chu Chunlun Dubai Roger Bobe Nawa Zadu
We will continue where we left off yesterday. We were studying the great basis of sovereign mind, marked by related and minor afflictive obscurations. We saw that in this great basis, that there are 10 mental events that make up this great basis. There are 3 left to go over. We looked at aggressiveness, resentment, evasive concealment, jealousy, meanness, direct concealment, greed. So what's left is deceit, self-absorption, and violence. This is all presented in stanza 27, as well as the first line of stanza 28. Deceit. Khelzang Puntso said that this mental event is very important because it's very dangerous. What is deceit? Out of attachment to wealth, possessions, and fame, we will lie. We will lead others to believe that we have qualities that we do not have. For example, Khelzang Puntso says, I'm a Lama without any particular qualities, and I'm going to make others believe that I have qualities in order to receive offerings. And maybe I will say, I have qualities, I have supersensory faculties, and thus we will let others believe that we have these qualities when we don't really have them. And so this is what we call deceit. Why is this mental event very dangerous? Because it gives rise to the 5 dishonest means of existence. Khelzang Puntso told us that Shama Rinpoché said that in the world, many people use dishonest means of existence based on this deceit. Then he presented these 5 dishonest means of existence. The first is trying to obtain something through pretension. For example, saying that we proclaiming that we're an arhat even though we are not. This is saying that we have certain qualities when we do not have them. The second dishonest means of existence is trying to obtain property or possessions through flattery. Within, what we want is to get money from someone, and thus, in order to do this, we will praise them. The third dishonest means of existence is trying to attain something through insinuation. For example, someone offers us a watch, but the watch doesn't work anymore. And so we will go see the donor and thank them for the gift, and also note that the watch doesn't work anymore, and insinuate that maybe the donor should pay for the repairs. So this is an example of the dishonest means of existence that is trying to obtain something through insinuations. The fourth is trying to obtain something through extortion. In other words, using force or power. For example, in the hope of obtaining offerings, we'll act as though we are teaching the Dharma, and we will tell those who are listening not to keep their money, but to use it to make donations. If this is done with an incorrect state of mind, it can be very dangerous. It is among these 5 dishonest means of existence. The fifth is trying to obtain something by tempting someone. and making them believe that they'll get something in return. For example, we'll praise someone else's qualities in order to get money. For example, we'll say to one person, "Oh, this person gave 100,000 euros and they're so generous." And in this way, by praising one person, we'll make the other person believe or be motivated to make a large donation, to do as much. In the past, the Buddha advised being wary of these 5 dishonest means of existence because we employ them without even realizing and without knowing that it is incorrect. Those were the explanations concerning deceit. That was the 8th of the 10 mental events here. Next we come to the 9th in this list, self-absorption. Self-absorption is attachment to our own excellent advantages. Our own body, our own wealth, for example. This is an infatuated state of mind, one that is full of itself, that loves what it possesses. And last we come to the 10th. It's ill will is written here, and the root text it said violence. Let's stick with violence. Forgive me, I forgot to update my document.
La violence, eh bien, ouais, du coup, c'est un peu l'explication, ça colle bien.
The explanation seems to go well with ill will. If I use violence, violence is not going through to action. It's just the desire for others to suffer. It is the opposite of compassion. Violence seems a bit strange. Ill will seems to fit better. You can put maybe a slash. The translators chose the term violence, but maybe needs to be looked at again. It's namtse in Tibetan. I'll repeat the definition again. Ill will is not moving to action. It is just the desire for another to suffer. It is the opposite of compassion. Behind the idea of violence, there is this idea of action, but maybe not necessarily.
Voilà, en tout cas, voilà, c'était les 10 événements d'esprit qui se trouvent dans notre ouvrage.
In any case, these are the 10 mental events that make up the great basis of mind, marked by related and minor afflictive obscurations.
Alors, maintenant, on a une petite explication de ce que sont les obscurcissements affligeants apparents.
And then comes a short explanation concerning the minor and related afflictive obscurations. There are 3 reasons for classifying certain afflictive obscurations in this group of related and minor afflictive obscurations. The first reason is that these afflictive obscurations are only associated with ignorance and not with any one of the other 5 major or root afflictive obscurations. The 6 major or root afflictive obscurations were listed yesterday: ignorance, desire, attachment, aversion, pride, view, and doubt. Out of these 6, related and minor afflictive obscurations are only associated with ignorance, not with the others. That's the first reason. The second reason is because they are only abandoned by the path of familiarization. We spoke a little about the different classes of things to abandon. As a reminder, if you recall, on the path, there are 5 classes of things to abandon. The first 4 classes of things to abandon, which are to abandon via the path of seeing. This class of things to abandon is abandoned by what is to be abandoned by the path of seeing the truth of suffering, what is to be abandoned through the path of seeing of the truth of the origin of suffering, what is to be abandoned by the path of seeing of the truth of cessation, and what is to be abandoned by the path of seeing of the truth of the path. The 5th and final class of things to abandon is what is to be abandoned through the path of familiarization. The minor and related afflictive obscurations are not a part of the first 4 classes of things to abandon, meaning they are not to be abandoned by the path of seeing. Rather, they belong to the 5th group or class of things to abandon through the path of familiarization. This is the second reason why these afflictive obscurations are said to be related and minor. Is that clear? The third reason is that these afflictive obscurations are only associated with mental consciousness and not with sense consciousness. That's the third reason. When an afflictive obscuration is said to be minor or related, or minor and related, it necessarily must bring together these 3 aspects. It must fulfill these 3 conditions. This concludes the presentation of the 5 great bases. Over the course of this presentation, Khelzang Puntso proposed a recap of what has been seen. And so we'll go over them again now and add some details before continuing with the commentary of the text. What he says to begin, he goes over the outline a bit. We are studying chapter 2 of the Abhidharmakosha, the presentation of the governing faculties. In the first part of the chapter, we studied the nature of governing faculty, point 1.1. We went over the 22 governing faculties in this first part of the chapter, which we concluded during this session. And then we continued with the second part of the chapter, section 1.2, the mode of birth of conditioned phenomena, with the classification into material and immaterial conditioned phenomena. We've made it to this second part, the mode of birth of immaterial phenomena, and more specifically within the detailed explanation of this, which includes 2 subsections. Within the mode of birth of immaterial phenomena, we are in the detailed explanation, notably the presentation of the birth of the duo, sovereign mind and mental events, and what's called in the outline the detailed explanation of what is associated by similarity with mind. That's what's just been explained. And then a little later on, we'll look at the presentation of the birth of conditioning phenomena not associated by similarity with mind. In this detailed explanation of the phenomena that are associated by similarity with mind, we went over mental events as they are explained in this text. We've gone over the mental events that are classified into the 5 great bases of sovereign mind. The first is the great basis of sovereign mind, which includes 10 mental events. Then the great basis of virtuous sovereign mind, which includes 10 mental events. Then the great basis of sovereign mind marked by afflictive obscurations, which includes 6 mental events. Then the great basis of non-virtuous sovereign mind, which includes 2 mental events. And last, the part we just concluded, the great basis of sovereign mind marked by minor and related afflictive obscurations, which includes 10 mental events. And this is what we have covered thus far here. So now we'll come back to each one of these great bases a bit, starting with the great basis of sovereign mind. These explanations aren't a direct commentary of the stanzas. This is supplementary explanations that come next. Khelzang Puntso says, when we talk about mind, this refers to sovereign mind. When we talk about mind, this refers to sovereign mind. Whether we talk about mind or sovereign mind, in this context, this refers to the same thing, and as we saw, refers to the aggregate of consciousnesses. The 10 mental events that make up the great basis of every sovereign mind are part of the aggregate of conditioning phenomena. More particularly, the conditioning phenomena associated by similarity with mind. Mental events, the 10 mental events of the great basis of sovereign mind, but mental events in general also, are part of the aggregate of conditioning phenomena, and more particularly, the conditioning phenomena associated by similarity with mind. Here, Khelzang Puntso comes back to the terminology, great basis. The term sa means basis. For example, we abide on the ground, we're dependent on this ground, it is what supports us. In the same way, this great basis, or these great bases of mind, are a support, a reference point. Due to the fact that these 10 mental events are the basis or support for every sovereign mind, they are said to be Sa-mo, great basis. That concerns the aspect of basis. If these 10 mental events were not there, sovereign mind could not remain or abide. This concerns the aspect of basis, along with the analogy of the ground which supports us. In this expression, we also find great. It is a great basis because these 10 mental events are the support, the basis for every sovereign mind, whatever kind it may be. They support all sovereign minds of the 3 realms. In other words, the sense pleasure realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. Wherever a sovereign mind is present, these 10 mental events will always be present. When it is said that these 10 mental events accompany every sovereign mind, this refers to 6 consciousnesses.
Lorsqu'on dit que ces 10 événements de l'esprit accompagnent tout esprit souverain, ici, tout esprit souverain, ça fait référence aussi conscience.
aggregate of consciousnesses, as we said. If we consider sense consciousness and visual consciousness, for example, around this visual consciousness, we necessarily also find these 10 mental events that accompany sovereign mind. Likewise, or the same goes for mental consciousness. All of these consciousnesses are accompanied by the 10 mental events that accompany every sovereign mind. Khelzang Puntso then says, from the beginning of the study of the Abhidharmakosha, we used various names to talk about mind. He mentions 3 here. Namshe, for example, which means consciousness. We also talk about Yi, which means mental or mental faculty. And we also talk about Sem, which means mind or sovereign mind, as we mentioned. And these 3 terms, Namshe, Yi, Sem, these 3 things refer to the same thing. They are equivalent. And there is a stanza about this subject later on. But here, he clarifies that when we talk about mental or mental faculty, this refers to the ayatana of the mental, the ayatana of the mental faculty, which was presented in chapter 1. How are you guys doing with this so far? So next there was a question that allowed Khelzang Puntso to develop this a bit, so we decided to share the question. The question was, I have this idea that sense consciousness is non-conceptual. How can mental events arise on the basis of non-conceptual sense consciousness? We used the example of visual consciousness, which, as we affirmed, is surrounded by all the other mental events as a great basis of sovereign mind. So for this person, it led them to this question: how can mental events arise based on non-conceptual sense consciousness? And there's a term that we weren't sure about, that we couldn't really double check. It was said, anyway, here it said, we saw in chapter 1 that sense consciousness was non-imaginative. That's what Dhagpo proposed at the time. We didn't find the term in the transcripts. But it seemed maybe it meant non-conceptual. We're not 100% sure, but it would make sense. Because indeed, sense consciousness is non-conceptual. That's for sure. But this doesn't mean that it doesn't have conceptualization. This connects to a point that we looked at in chapter 1, the 3 types of conceptualization. We talked about natural conceptualization, certain conceptualization, and the conceptualization of memory or remembrance. Out of these 3, sense consciousness possesses the first conceptualization, which is natural conceptualization. And yes, as we clarified that this was related to course examination. The 10 mental events that accompany every sovereign mind are around visual consciousness, for example, or any other sense consciousness, because the sense consciousnesses are sovereign mind and thus are accompanied by these mental events that accompany every sovereign mind. Khelzang Puntso continues, so we might ask ourselves why around visual consciousness do we find the mental event of attention, which was described earlier. Why is this mental event found around visual consciousness? If this mental event were not there, then sense consciousness could not focus on a particular object. And then he goes into more detail again here. He explained that early on at the Shedra, the monastic university, Khelzang Puntso studied logic, tsema, and then he studied Abhidharmakosha. And he received 2 different pieces of information. First, he learned that this mental event, attention, only goes with mental consciousness. That's Tsema's approach. However, when he studied the Abhidharmakosha after, he saw that this was not the case. And this mental event of attention can also be present with sense consciousness. And this is due to there having been different views. One doesn't cancel out the other. In any case, if we continue with this mental event of attention, consciousness itself is open like the sky. And in this open consciousness, it can happen that the pillar, for example, is reflected. A pillar or a bowl, any object. And this is due to the mental event of attention. Because consciousness itself is this open, neutral thing. Attention is what directs consciousness toward a pillar or a bowl or another object. Attention is what directs the consciousness towards the object. He continues a bit more. Khelzang Puntso's teacher at that time gave another example. He said, consciousness is like a white fabric. Sometimes it can happen that the fabric gets blue or green or something. the color of the fabric doesn't depend on the fabric itself, but on something else. The fabric itself is white. Here, consciousness refers to the fabric, and the colors that this fabric can take on refer to the mental event of attention. That was a bit of development concerning attention and in general related to the great basis of mind. We also find the mental event of impulse, which, as we saw, is what gets the consciousness moving, what never lets it rest but always pushes it toward action. Like giving an order. Due to this impulse, consciousness can become virtuous, non-virtuous, or sometimes undefined. When the order is given, then mind sets into motion. And when the mind begins moving, then consciousness will reflect objects, like a pillar, a vase, a bowl, etc. What focuses on the vase or the pillar is the mental event of attention. We also find the mental events of distinction and concentration. And concerning concentration, we saw that in a single instant, consciousness can be focused on a particular object without anything distracting it. Being focused on an object in this way without distraction can be accomplished thanks to the mental event of concentration or meditative absorption. Next comes a point on how we know mental events. We'll see it's not that simple. Due to being ordinary beings, we can't be conscious of all these processes. At this stage, being an ordinary being, we can simply have confidence in what the Buddha said. This knowledge that we might have of mental events it comes from confidence in the Buddha's teaching. He adds that Vasubandhu himself, the author of the Abhidharmakosha, stated in his self-commentary that if someone asked him to describe all these processes, to show each of the mental events, for example, those that accompany every sovereign mind, he would answer that this goes beyond his realm of knowledge. That we can only have confidence in the sutras and the Buddha's words. Vasubandhu continued with this question: what is the most difficult to understand, matter or consciousness? In matter, we find smell, tactility, taste. Even though the presence of smell, tactility, taste even though we can easily understand the presence of these things within particles, it's difficult to prove. And Vasubandhu continues, it's even more difficult to describe the whole process of consciousnesses and mental events. Due to being ordinary beings, we cannot apprehend this. For the moment, we need to accept it with confidence. Because it's only when we will be Buddhas that we will be able to know this. To conclude this point, he offers an example. The consciousnesses and the mental events are like twins. Twins resemble each other 99%, and the first time we see them, we can't determine who is who. For that, we need time. For example, the parents' kids know which twin is which. They recognize them due to being accustomed to it. It takes 20 or 30 years to be able to recognize them in a single moment. So that's the recap of the first great basis. We'll continue with the second. Let's take a short silent break. Clarity and relaxation. We'll continue with our recap. It's also an opportunity to get some complementary information concerning these 5 great bases of sovereign mind.
Donc là, on va
So here we will come back to the great basis of virtuous sovereign minds. What this virtuous sovereign mind refers to is these 6 groups of consciousness. The 5 sensory and the mental. Virtuous mind depends on the 10 mental events that accompany every virtuous sovereign mind. So the 10 mental events that we went over yesterday. And it is indeed said that virtuous mind depends on. Without this relationship of dependence, mind could not be virtuous. The presence of these virtuous mental events makes mind virtuous. What does a virtuous mind represent? Let's start with a virtuous mental event, like the first in the list, confidence. Confidence is a mental event. And we know that with every mental event, there's naturally sovereign mind. They always go together. Confidence is therefore always accompanied by sovereign mind. As confidence is virtuous, the sovereign mind that accompanies it is also virtuous. This emphasizes the fact that sovereign mind and mental events cannot be dissociated. From the moment that this sovereign mind is virtuous, it will always have the group of 10 mental events that always accompany every virtuous sovereign mind. And if there is a virtuous mental event present, such as confidence, then the sovereign mind will necessarily be virtuous, and not only confidence will be present, all 10 virtuous mental events will be present. Then he continued with the great basis of sovereign mind associated with afflictive obscurations. When we talk about afflictive obscurations, this refers to the kleshas in Sanskrit. When we look at the etymology of this term, this refers to the fact that when a klesha is present in the mind stream of a person, it will bring about disturbances. Mind will not be peaceful. It doesn't say more about the etymology than that. It's more about the function of the kleshas, or what they produce. When the kleshas are present in the mind of a person, this leads to disturbances and makes the mind not peaceful. When we talk about a mind marked by afflictive obscurations, this means that mind is associated with or marked by an afflictive obscuration. Around this afflicted mind, there will necessarily be these 6 mental events that make up the great basis of sovereign mind marked by afflictive obscurations. If an afflictive obscuration arises due to it being a mental event, along with this afflictive obscuration, there will be an afflicted mind, a mind marked by affliction. If afflicted mind is present for someone, then it will always be accompanied by the 6 mental events that accompany every sovereign mind marked by afflictive obscurations. When desire arises, consciousness also arises. This consciousness is sovereign mind marked by afflictive obscurations, because desire itself is an afflictive obscuration. This consciousness, this afflicted mind, will always be surrounded by the 6 mental events that we have seen. Ignorance, absence of careful attention, laziness, absence of confidence, torpor, and agitation, pardon me. These 6 always go together. Next, he talks more about the great basis of non-virtuous sovereign mind. Khelzang Puntso says, before talking about this 4th group, we'll take time to look at what non-virtuous means, notably the relationship of these mental events with the afflictive obscurations. We'll look at the relationship of these non-virtuous mental events and afflictive obscurations. In the sense pleasure realm, not all afflictive obscurations are necessarily non-virtuous. Not all afflictive obscurations are necessarily non-virtuous. Among the 5 views, we haven't talked a lot about the 5 views. We'll talk about it more in the 5th chapter, but just to name them, the first is the view of a whole in destruction. The second is false view. The third is a view that grasps extremes. The fourth is a view that takes for supreme an extreme view. And the fifth is a view that takes for supreme a discipline or observance that is extreme. Sorry, the fourth one again. A view that takes for supreme a false view. That's the fourth one. And the fifth, a view that takes for supreme a discipline or observance that is mistaken. Among the 5 views, the first, the view of a whole and destruction, which is also called belief in a self, and view that grasps extremes. These 2 views are afflictive obscurations, and they are not non-virtuous. Among the 5 views, the first, the view of a whole in destruction, and the third, a view that grasps extremes. These 2 views are afflictive obscurations that are not non-virtuous. And then there are 2 types of ignorance.
il y a ignorance qui est associée à ces deux vies.
And we find ignorance that is associated with these two views that are not non-virtuous. The ignorance that is associated with these two views is likewise not non-virtuous. In the sense-pleasure realm, we've just cited 3 afflictive obscurations. The first view, the view of a whole in destruction. The third view, a view that grasps extremes. And the ignorance associated with these two, thus 3 afflictive obscurations. And in the sense-pleasure realm, these 3 afflictive obscurations are not non-virtuous. They are said to be undefined. This may be the first time that we're talking about this. In any case, we will talk about it again. It's a piece of information that's helpful to know. Little by little, we'll see what is truly present in the sense-pleasure realm. With this information, what we learn is that all afflictive obscurations found in the sense-pleasure realm are non-virtuous, except for these 3, which are undefined. So it's good to know. Khelzang Puntso says, I'm telling you about this now because it's the right time to introduce this idea. It's also important to know that non-virtue mainly applies to the sense-pleasure realm. Because in the 2 higher realms, the form realm and the formless realm, there are afflictive obscurations, but all the afflictive obscurations present in the 2 higher realms are all undefined. There are no non-virtuous afflictive obscurations in the 2 higher realms. For example, in the desire realm, pride, anger, desire, all of that, those are all afflictive obscurations. In the desire or sense-pleasure realm, they are non-virtuous, like all afflictive obscurations other than the 3 that we just explained. In the 2 higher realms, we'll find desire, we'll find pride. But in the 2 higher realms, this desire and this pride are not non-virtuous. They are undefined. We'll talk about this on other occasions as well. In any case, all afflictive obscurations of the sense-pleasure realm, excepting the 3 we just named, the view of a self, the view that grasps extremes, and the ignorance that is associated with them, are concomitant with a non-virtuous sovereign mind. And we saw that the great basis of non-virtuous sovereign mind is made up of 2 mental events: absence of respect and absence of consideration. These these are added elements that are helpful to know for what comes next, because we will analyze, for example, what do we find around a sovereign mind that is afflicted by desire in the desire realm. We'll count things up and we'll see, okay, yes, necessarily we find the 10 that accompany every sovereign mind because it's afflicted. We'll find the 6 that accompany every afflicted sovereign mind because it is a non-virtuous affliction. We'll find the 2 non-virtuous mental events, etc. And then we'll add desire attachment. So in the following points, we will analyze based on this information. We'll analyze what we encounter in the different realms. Next, Khelzang Puntso talked to us about the great basis of sovereign mind marked by related and minor afflictive obscurations. This great basis is made up of the 10 mental events that we went over. Aggressiveness, resentment, evasive concealment, jealousy, meanness, direct concealment, greed, deceit, self-absorption, and ill will or violence. He reminded us that when we talk about related and minor afflictive obscurations, these afflictive obscurations are minor and related for 3 reasons: due to their association, only associated with ignorance, due to the class of things to be abandoned that they belong to. We saw that they belong to the class of things to be abandoned by the path of familiarization, and due to their support, which is mental consciousness. Khelzang Puntso reminds us that concerning this association, there are the 6 root afflictive obscurations: desire, attachment, hatred, aversion, ignorance, doubt, pride, and view. Among these 6, related and minor afflictive obscurations are only associated with 1 root afflictive obscuration: ignorance. So he's reviewing the reasons why there are the related and minor afflictive obscurations. We're repeating the list of 6 root afflictive obscurations: desire, attachment, hatred, aversion, ignorance, doubt, pride, and view. This is just the list of these 6 root afflictive obscuration, and what's being said here is that the related and minor afflictive obscurations, which are at hand here, are related and minor because they are only associated with 1 root afflictive obscuration, that of ignorance. We'll see later how these 6 root afflictive obscurations are organized. So the first reason why we call these minor and related afflictive obscurations minor and related is due to their association with solely ignorance, with ignorance alone of the 6 root afflictive obscurations. we also call them related and minor because they are only, they belong to the class of things to abandon by the path of familiarization. Because they only belong to one class of things, to be abandoned, they are called related and minor. And in relation to their support, each of the 6 consciousnesses relies on the support of the 6 faculties. Out of these 6 faculties, the consciousness that is associated with related and minor afflictive obscurations only relies on mental faculty. It's another way of saying this. Earlier we said that they're only associated with mental consciousness. Now we're talking about the mental faculty. For an afflictive obscuration to be able to be called related and minor, it needs to bring together these 3 conditions. If it only has 1 or 2 of these conditions, it's not in this category. And to conclude this session, we will talk about the unusual functioning of this 5th great basis. When we talk about a sovereign mind associated with, marked by minor and related afflictive obscurations, this concerns sovereign mind that is concomitant with or similar to the minor and related afflictive obscurations. We're talking about the great basis of afflictive obscurations that are related and minor, but these mental events do not function in the same way as the previous great bases. Why? Because the mental events that make up the 5th great basis are not all present at the same time, unlike the first 4 bases. With the previous groups, the first 4 great bases, when a sovereign mind is present, the entirety of the relative group is always present and followed the sovereign mind at hand. Every sovereign mind for the first group, virtuous minds for the second group, afflicted minds for the third group, or non-virtuous minds for the 4th group. The first 4 great bases, for the first 4 great bases, the mental events function together. However, for the related and minor afflictive obscurations, they are not always present together for a sovereign mind marked by minor and related afflictive obscurations. For example, out of the 10 related and minor afflictive obscurations, it is possible for only aggressiveness to be present. Greed and deceit are not necessarily present. Greed and deceit, for example, don't arise with aggressiveness. So this was a recap, and also we concluded with an important point which explains how the 5th great basis is different from the first 4. It has an unusual or particular functioning. We will conclude here. It's not bad because we have concluded something. It's easy to jump back into things next time. We'll begin next session with the undetermined mental events that we haven't looked at yet. So we have a little time for questions. Some people are already heading out. I understand. I'm not taking it personally. Okay, last day, and I'm totally lost. I feel like I have 10,000 questions, but so I'm just missing one of these 6 afflictive root afflictive obscurations. So yeah. Once again, the 6 root afflictive obscurations are desire, attachment, hatred, aversion, ignorance, doubt, pride, and view. It's said that related and minor afflictive obscurations are only associated with ignorance. Okay, but in the description of aggressiveness, it was said that it is related to aversion. So how can they be only associated with ignorance if I don't know if this is the right answer, but we said that aggressiveness appears based on aversion. Aversion disturbs mind to the point that aggressiveness arises and we want to hurt another. What I understand, at least, doesn't mean that these two are present together. When we say that aggressiveness appears based on aversion, we can imagine that aggressiveness follows aversion. Whereas it's said that these 10 minor and related afflictive obscurations are only associated with ignorance. This means we're talking about the same moment, and so this meaning that ignorance is the only root afflictive obscuration that is associated with these. Questioner says, I read that aggressiveness, I guess I understood it, that aggressiveness is related to aversion, but maybe that's not it. I had another question when you talked about attention. Attention that's also found in the sense consciousnesses. I would have thought that it was mental consciousness that dictates to these sense consciousnesses to be attentive. Maybe I'm thinking of someone who's working or reading and focused on something, and I'll talk to the person. If I talk to one person, they'll immediately say what's up, and if I talk to another person, this person who's focused, they won't answer because they're absorbed in what they're doing. And so my understanding is that it's mental consciousness that is not allowing sense consciousness to function. The peer answers. This brings up a point of view of Tsema, and Khelzang Puntso told us that he started with Tsema, and that in this in the context of Tsema, attention is only present with mental consciousness, Whereas here he explains that in the context of Abhidharma and the Abhidharmakosha in particular, it's different. Attention without attention, as we saw, visual consciousness or any other sense consciousness can't even focus on its object. It's explained in that way, and then we can see whether or not we agree. It's important to take the time. It's good to bring up all these things, and it's also helpful to slow down and think about it ourselves, reflect. There are certain things that the first time we hear them doesn't really make sense at all, and then over time it makes more sense. And of course, this is the presentation of the Vaibhashika view. And it's not because it's not the Mahayana that there aren't things that are correct. Everything that's presented here, not everything that's presented here is refuted by the Mahayana viewpoints. Thank you for the presentation. I wrote down 3 conceptualizations, natural and certain, and I don't remember the second one. There's natural conceptualization, certain conceptualization, and the conceptualization of remembrance. We went over them in the first chapter. One last question. And we'll leave you. I'm a bit ill at ease asking this question, but I need some clarification about the 3 realms. Desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. I'm not sure if I understood. Beings in the desire realm can access the samadhis of the form realm, maybe even the formless realm. But who's in the desire realm? It's okay, but who's in the form and the formless realm? How does it work? How do these 3 domains work? It's very simple. We'll talk a lot about this. It'll get much clearer in the following chapter, but generally speaking, to be born in the form and formless realm, in the sense pleasure realm, we can cultivate meditative absorption. We attain these meditative absorptions. They are truly present. And then, at the moment of death, our following rebirth is in the level of meditative absorption that corresponds. For example, if in the desire realm we accomplish, complete, we could say perfect or actualize the meditation of the first meditative absorption, then at the moment of death we will be reborn in the first meditative absorption of the form realm. So that's the logic of it, but we'll talk a lot more about it. It will get much clearer as we continue our study of this text. Very much. And we look forward to seeing you and have a safe drive home and carry on well.
De na genji jesu dala jenje wadi tamje rado ngo zanje gozo nyebe jinadon jinadon gendu mi je dumbe jinlab ge jedang wam anam dro barayo. Et merci à toutes les personnes qui nous ont suivis aussi en streaming sur YouTube. Ah oui, pardon. Of course. Oui, et bien sûr, votre soutien est sollicité pour le rangement des tablettes, des tapis et des coussins. Merci.